Hey guys, kinggath here with Bethesda Mod School. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to take multiple NPCs and let them have a conversation with each other. And likely at the end of this, I'll even then tie it in real quickly to show you how you would inject multiple NPCs into a player conversation. It's virtually the same way you do with multiple NPCs, but just to tie it all in together. And because we happen to be each one of these dialogue lessons, I'm just duplicating the previous plugin and sound files and building on it, so it's already there. We've already got player dialogue and everything set up, so it'll be an easy addition to tack on and give you guys a more thorough look at this. So I've already gone ahead and set all of this one up, so this is going to be walking you through what I've already set up, and I did this just because I wanted to make sure that I had it all correct and I wasn't giving bad information based on my testing and everything. So the things we've done here. So I set up a copy of Gath. I named him Other Gath, and I just removed his helmet so we could see the difference between them. And then I think this one I literally named Other Gath as his name that'll pop up in the subtitles. And then we've taken this quest here, and if you're wondering where this plugin came from, it was the one that we created in Dialogue 105 or 106, the one that was merged with Questing 105 or 106. I can't remember which is which, but basically it was that, and then we built on that to do the speech check in Dialogue 107. And then now we're here. So I'm going to just continue to do that, to build on that. So if you're not following along with both series, I highly recommend you do, because the information between the two of them is going to just really overlay now. A lot of the dialogue and questing stuff is going to be in between each other. It's going to pass back and forth between each other, and I'm going to be using the same plugins to build on that information. And generally, I think if you are interested in dialogue, you're also interested in quest making, so you might as well have that knowledge as well. But that is where we're coming from. So we've got this this starts quest thing that has our speech checks and everything in it. So this is what we're building on. So I added a new scene called Gath on Gath. And this mess here is what we've got. So I'm gonna actually go through and I'm gonna rebuild this, and so you guys can see how exactly I did this without me having to walk you through, or with me having to just click on these things. I'm gonna show you guys how to do this yourselves. So we're gonna go and do let's see, we'll call this intro quest. Sure, we'll call Gath on Gath rebuild. Here we go. Okay, we're going to click on this. Okay, so we've got our scene active. So the first thing we need to do is get our actors in this scene. So we can actually select multiple actors, and that's what we're going to do. And you'll see that each gets its own little box. And if we right-click here and hit Add Phase at End, you'll see that each actually has what I call a track. I don't know if that's the official term that Bethesda uses, but it basically have a track. And what I mean by the track is, if we were to go back to one of our other ones, you can see that Gath here is all one big thing, and all of our little actions on the phases all stick within his track. Now, what's cool about having multiple characters is that each of them can actually have multiple actions on their track. So we could do something like add a dialogue. I'm not filling it in, but we could give that to each of them. And whenever a phase occurs, any actions on each track, these will happen in parallel with each other. So you can actually make two NPCs talk over one another if you wanted to. So if you wanted to have like an argument scene or something, you can actually have NPCs interrupting each other and talking over each other, which is kind of cool. In our case, we're actually going to use this. So if we look back at our scene we're emulating, you can actually see that I have two actions, and an action for each of them in both of the first two phases. And this is a little trickery. So this is one of those little tips that I wasn't sure where else to put it, but this is the first time it's relevant, so this is where it's going. There are some cool things you can do with the NPCs to make them face each other and look at each other, so where their heads are looking, and you're actually in control of that. Now, when you're dealing with just the player and an NPC, your player will naturally be looking at the NPC, and the NPC will naturally be looking at the player. Once you add a third party in, suddenly that's all thrown into question, because it wouldn't make any sense for both characters to constantly be staring at the player. They should be looking at whoever's speaking. That's what's natural. That's what we do in conversation. We all look at the speaker. And so you have to handle that manually. Now I'm going to show you some tricks for managing that. So the first trick is the back-to-back actions of the same exact thing. And the reason we have to do this is because there's a little checkbox in here, so we're going to bring this up, called Face Target. And what this is supposed to do is force the NPC to turn their body toward the person that you select in this box down here. So we're on the Gath track that I opened up, and we want them to face Other Gath. Now, the reason we're going to do two of this exact same thing is because, for whatever reason, 90% of the time, this does not work the first time you call it, but then does work the second time. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's something at the start of a scene it's not possible to call a face target. Maybe it only works in phase 2, but I've tried doing it only in phase 2 and it doesn't seem to work. And again, this could be one of those things that I've taught myself incorrectly, and somebody might know the answer of why this happens, and that maybe this isn't actually a solution. This is actually just bypassing another issue, or I've created myself a false solution that works, but that's not why it works, etc. So this feels like one of those types of things. So if any of you guys happens to know what exactly is going on here, would definitely love to know that so that I can share that information with others. But for the sake of this, because I know it does work, I used it a lot myself, I'm going to teach you guys how to do this because it's just a little trick. Now, one thing some of you might have caught is when I checked in face target, this complete face target popped up. Now, I mistakenly used that in some of my early quest designs that I released, thinking that it meant like for them to completely face the target, to actually turn them. But what it actually means is that in order for this action to complete, to be considered completed, because the way that actions in a phase work is they have to do everything. So if there are multiple lines of dialogue, all of them have to be spoken. If there's an AI package, the package has to be considered complete in order for the action to complete and the next phase to be able to happen. So what this checkbox is saying is that until the NPC faces the target, this action cannot complete. Now, since I just told you that sometimes this face target just doesn't work, it appears to just be ignored, having the two of these checked in almost guarantees that your scene at some point for some number of players is just going to completely lock up and do nothing. So my bet is that this is from older games, something like Oblivion, where you had or even older Fallouts, where the NPC would turn toward the player and the camera would zoom in on them. It might have been something like that, where until that happens, the action wasn't meant to go forward, and then maybe that would make sense. But in Fallout 4, this is just no good. Don't use it. And again, if somebody knows a use case for this or what it's supposed to do, I would love to hear about it. All right, the next box we're going to check in is keep target on action end. Now, technically, we don't have to do this in this particular action. We could just do it in the next one. I'll explain better what that does once we're further down in these phases. It'll be easier for me to explain visually, but I'm just going to check it in because it's going to save us a step in a minute. All right, so now we've set that one up. So we've got Gath looking at other Gath. Now we're going to do the reverse here. We're going to do face target, and we're going to do it to Gath. So we want other Gath facing and looking at Gath. Okay, so now we're going to copy this action and paste it here. And again, we're going to do the same thing here and copy this one and paste it here. Now, the reason we did this is just because of that little quirk that I just explained to you, where the face target doesn't seem to work unless you call it twice in a row. So that is what we're doing here. So now let's imagine what we actually want to happen here is we want these two to just be having some idle conversation before the player walks up and starts the little quest we have about the player fetching a wrench. So we're going to do a real basic conversation, and I'm actually going to show you guys another useful little trick that I don't think's come up so far in the dialogue tutorials, but it's really, really powerful and helpful. And there's actually two ways we can do this. So maybe I'll try and teach you both here. So what we're going to have happen here, if we look at our existing one, is we're going to just basically have our regular Gath say this line, then other Gath says this line, and then the original Gath says that line. And that's all it is. And we have it set up to loop, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. But there are two ways we can get this dialogue into here. So like why, I've already recorded and set up the lib files and everything, so why reinvent the wheel here? So the first way that I will use is called shared infos. And now that I'm saying this, I feel like I may have already done this in a tutorial, but it doesn't hurt to cover this again. But we're going to go make shared info. So you right click on a line, you hit make shared info. Then you have to give that an ID. So and what I like to do is name these after, I make sure that somewhere in here, the character name is in here. And then I just start typing up part of the line. So, hey, have you seen? And like I tend to just go with 3 or 4 words. And as long as it's not a used ID, if it gives me an error, then I just keep adding an additional word until I get there. If it was a real short sentence and it gives me an error, I'll add 001, 002, etc. to the end of it. So there we go. So now we have a shared line. And what a shared line means is that we can reuse this line somewhere else, and it will have the exact same audio setup so that we don't have to do any of that. We don't have to re-record this. It will save the file space. So then we can come down to our Gath on Gath here, go to our action, and do a new dialogue line. And then we can actually, instead of typing it in here, we cancel here. And then right in this little guy, I just started typing. Well, any drop-down menu in the creation kit, you can start typing in letters and it will jump to those. Since we only have one shared info defined, it's right there. Have you seen my wrench around here? Now you'll notice that when we have this shared here, if I try and double click this, it doesn't do anything. And so if you ever find that you're trying to double click the text so that you could edit it and it won't let you, it probably means you have a share response selected, and that's where it's getting its information from. So now if we look here, now we have this exact same line on our original one that I did off camera and on this new one that we're trying to rebuild. So that's one way we can do it. Another way we can do it is we can actually copy an action and come over here and paste it. Now, the problem with this method is that the audio file should change name. Hopefully it doesn't make a liar out of me. So this one is 3DA51. Let's go back to the other one. And this one is 3D991. So now there are two ways we can handle this. We could either re-record this, which would be fine, or, oops, we want to do it on this one, or we can just go rename the other file, which is what I'm going to do. Off camera. I'm not going to show you, but so that's another way we could do that. So there are two ways we can get this stuff in here. I am going to just copy these actions over, and then I'll deal with the file stuff off camera. If you guys don't know where the files are kept, I've shown that in some of these other videos. You probably go back through and go through some of those. I've talked about those, especially in the lip sync generation. I think I've showed you guys where all those files and a bunch of tricks you can do with those. So that is where you would find those. But I will show you real quick, just for the sake of it, because it was just there. But this path right here will show you where to find those. But if you want any more information about that, head back and watch the rest of the series again. Okay, so now let's go and talk about the box, this little box right here, and why we checked it in, even though it doesn't really matter in this first box here. So the reason I did that was because I actually wanted it in these two. And since I was copy pasting, I was just going to save myself of having to click it again in there. And I guess really that doesn't matter. Like now I'm doing all these clicks, but it was basically like, so if you would imagine I didn't check it in here, I copy paste this, now I have to come in here and open this one again. I am opening it in front of you guys because I'm just trying to demonstrate things, but in reality, I'm showing you guys in the speed of things. If I were doing this for real on my own, I would never need to open this. So that was the reason, why I did that. So what that actual box does is it says this target, this face stuff, keep this stuff in play until something else happens, until another action comes along that changes it. So what that does is that covers us for these blank phases. So now, since we have keep target on action end, during this phase, when the other gath is talking, he will continue to look at other gath and face him. If instead we had this unchecked here, then during this phase, he would just, instead of facing other gath, he would just face forward in his normal stance and not even look at the gath, and it would feel very broken, especially with two NPCs talking where the player isn't in a dialogue camera, because at this point the player is just in their first person or third person camera and they're just seeing these two NPCs and one just refuses to look at the other. So this keep target on action end covers for these blank phases so that we don't have to have these blank actions everywhere. The only reason we have them at the beginning here is because we want to make sure that they're facing each other as they start their conversation. And the two of them, again, because of that little quirk in the game engine. So that's the only reason this looks so wonky early on. So then in here we have the same thing. We have this stuff all checked. It was because it was already set up on the other one that I did. So this isn't something that's naturally checked on its own. All this stuff starts off by default. If you have a multi-NPC conversation, you should plan on going to every single one of your speaking actions and determining who you want that NPC looking at. And often, if you have a lot of people speaking, it's often correct to go in and have to set up a bunch of these blanks for everyone, and it's a real pain in the butt. So I don't recommend getting into gigantic conversations. I've done conversations for the Conqueror quest line with 7 or 8 participants, and we just have a mess of these empty actions because you want everybody looking at the speaker. Now with dialogue camera, it can be less necessary because the dialogue camera is focusing on the speaker, so you're unlikely to see the faces of the other people, so you wouldn't even notice who they're staring at. But we like to set up a lot of our scenes so that they'll work even if the player is just walking up on them, so then you just want them to look natural. So again, this is the amount of depth you can go to in this engine, in this scene system. You can control where people are looking while they're speaking or not speaking in a scene. So very powerful, but also a lot of work. So keep that in mind if you're planning out scenes, is that you might want to limit the number of participants, or you're going to have to take some shortcuts that might not look as realistic. So all right, so now we've got the keep target on action end. So then when Gath is speaking again, this other Gath will continue to face him. All right, so that sets us up for our first little simple conversation. So now I want this thing to repeat. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a quick little timer, so it's not just over and over again. There'll be a slight delay, because the idea here is I want the player to just come across at once before they go and start up the quest. So we'll just do like 6 seconds. And now we need to set up a repeat. So we'll go add phase at end, and we will do new action, start scene, and we will just restart this scene. And this thing right here is basically just an action that can start a scene. You're actually starting a scene with adding a new here. And the reason for this is that what the power of this thing here is, and I might have already shown this in another one of the guides, but again, I'm happy to cover things multiple times. Make sure you guys catch it all. Is that you can set up conditions on this. So the idea would be, let's see, I don't know. I'm going to have to look at what phases those are. But the idea would be you could have this one conditioned. So maybe under some circumstances you wanted to jump to this scene, and then maybe you want to do another one where instead it goes to this scene instead, and you condition each of them differently. So this is a way to kind of have forks in the conversation where depending on circumstances it will jump to one conversation or another. You'll see this a lot in Bethesda stuff. Okay, so now I need to go double check the phase names here to make sure I get them in the right place. Okay, and no, so we want to, I did that wrong. We want this to go to, I mean, we definitely want to set up a scene, but I have it going to the wrong scene. I set them to some other scene, not this one. We want to select it back to this same one. So Gath on Gath rebuild is what we actually wanted. All right, so now when we hit this, you're going to see this arrow appears looping back to the beginning. So now basically, after 6 seconds, it's going to get to this phase, and this action is just going to say, go ahead and start this scene, which happens to be the one we're in. So it just puts this arrow in to loop us back to the beginning. So that's great, except that that would just repeat indefinitely, and it would even likely interrupt the conversation the player was having with them. So that's not good. So we need to stop that. So we're going to put in a condition here so that this phase can only start if these conditions are met. And what our conditions are going to be are, we're going to make sure that this scene here with the player talking to Gath to get the quest, that this isn't running, so that the scene isn't happening right then, and also that it hasn't completed already, so where they've got the quest. So I've already set that up here, so I'm just going to copy these conditions. Let's see, I got to open up here and copy all conditions. And we'll go back here, and I'll go over these conditions, so because that's one of those things where it takes a long time to learn all the possible conditions. But you see there's one called is scene playing, and we selected our starts quest is 0. So if it's playing right now, this will evaluate to 1, and then this condition will be false, which will make it so that this phase cannot be started. So the only way this phase right here can be started right now is if both of these things evaluate to true. So we're saying, is scene playing, that other one, equals 0, that means it's not playing. So we're saying whenever equal to 0, we're asking for that to not be true. And then for the second one is stage 10, which is when the player finishes that conversation, they get the actual quest objective to pop up on their screen to go get the wrench. And as long as that is still 0, so that it hasn't happened yet, as long as both of these are true, the scene is not playing because we're doing equal to 0, and the stage 10 has not completed, is not done, is also equal to 0. Both of those things are true. It can continue to loop. But once one of those things happens, so once the player walks up and starts this conversation, or once the player finishes that conversation and gets the quest, if either of those things are true, this will fail, and so this phase will get skipped, and then as soon as this timer ends, this whole scene will end. So this will loop until one of those things happens, so until the player walks up and starts the conversation or finishes it. All right, so now the next thing we need to know is, how are we going to start this scene? Well, we're going to just take advantage of this nice little checkbox up here, begin on quest start. So what's going to happen there is the game is going to boot up. Since this quest happens to have start game enabled checked in, it's going to launch the quest. It's going to fill in all these aliases, and then it's going to check all these scenes and see if any of them have begin on quest start, and if so, it will start them right up. So now I'm going to disable this guy. And actually, we talked about me rebuilding sound files. That's just dumb. I'm going to just turn this one off, and I'll just let the game use this one that I know already works. But we can look at these. I'll show you. They're identical. We've got our conditions there. We've got our 6-second action. We've got our 3 spoken lines, and it's identical. In fact, you couldn't even tell, like from clicking the 2, that anything changed. All this stuff is identical. So even though I'm not enabling this one to start, you can see this one is enabled. You guys can see it's the same. It's set up identically. So we now I was going to just pop in a game right there and show you this, but I did mention I will hook in this other Gath into the player conversation too. So let's go ahead and give him a role in this. So we've got our player conversation. So we're going to go ahead and add an actor here. So a new actor, and we'll add in other Gath. And now you see he gets his own track here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to insert another phase. And let's see here. And then we're going to have him inject something. So we'll go ahead and do dialogue here. And we are going to have them head track the player, face the target, keep target on action end. And we'll have him say something. So let's say, this guy's a liar if I've ever seen one. Okay, and there we go. So now he's going to interject that, and then Gath will speak that. Now, because we introduced another NPC here, we actually are probably going to want to make sure that this Gath is looking at the player this whole time. Now, unfortunately, in player dialogue here, we can't make them... Actually, this is a great opportunity to see about something that I've never used before. So there's the possibility here to select multiple boxes, and I've never used it, and I want to see what happens. So we're going to check in both of there, but basically we're going to set it up so that as the player conversation starts, this Gath will look at them, and then since I checked that keep target on action end, it should maintain it during this phase as well, so that they're actually looking at them. And we'll go ahead on this one, new action dialogue, and we'll have them, while that other Gath is speaking, we won't face him, we'll just look at him. So by face target means face their whole body. Just clicking them here just makes them head track over to that person. So we'll have them head track there, and then we're going to, on this one, we're going to have them head track back to the player. So they briefly will look over at this person when they talk, and then they'll look back to the player with that. Now, if we wanted to change who that player was facing and adding, you can actually do that as well. We can actually go in and add player default, and then we could have them. In fact, we can even copy this guy. This is a cool little trick you can do. We can paste this in here. If we open this up, it's having them look at other Gaths. So this will actually work with the player. The player can actually be looking at a particular NPC. And so then we could do it something like paste this here and change this one so that they look at Gath, who's speaking in this line. So again, the more actors you add, the more complicated all this facing gets to. And so I think if you look at Bethesda stuff, they almost never bother with it. I'm a sucker for this. I love the cutscene dialogue system, and so like I try to make it look as good as possible. Totally unnecessary. You don't have to go to all this trouble, but if you're a perfectionist like I am with this stuff, that's how you do it. Okay, so now what we should see happen when we get in game is we're gonna load up the game, and I have a save right in Sanctuary, right where these guys are chilling, where my character is gonna load up, like right in front of them, right around here somewhere. So then right at the game, we're gonna hear these two saying this. We should wait 6 seconds, see if it repeats, and then we're gonna walk up and talk to them, and then we should get our normal conversation. Then normally when we expect that we'd be getting the quest objective, instead we're gonna have other Gath interject, and then finally we'll get the quest. That's how this should also play out. So let's hop in game and see that I'm not crazy. All right, now I ran into a little problem in my quick demo of injecting this little thing, and it never fired. And I came back in here and realized I made a mistake. And since some of you guys are following along editing the plugin, I want to make sure you guys see what I need to do here. So the reason that it doesn't work is because you can see these arrows down here. The only way to get to the quest is indirectly through a couple of jumps, because we set up all of this speech check stuff and the secondary question thing. So the phases aren't naturally flowing left to right. I have too many little hooks in here skipping around and jumping all over the place. So basically in this mess of lessons that I've created showing you guys all these things, I created a quest that or a scene that is hard to work with. And this is one of the things you got to watch out for with if you're editing any vanilla scenes, or if you start creating complicated scenes, is that then something that should be really simple, like injecting an NPC's response, can suddenly become a little more complicated. But because some of you will run into this as you're doing things, you might as well go through and fix it, and it'll give you guys a chance to learn some more stuff if you didn't catch on to it from before. So first thing we got to do if we ever want to jump to a phase, well, I guess we have to give it a name. So we'll just call this interjection, and then we hit apply so that it will be available in our selections. So now we got to trace back these two arrows that are skipping to make sure that we instead skip to this guy. So the thing they were skipping was this secondary question. So basically one of our paths of dialogue would go to this question here, and we need to be able to bypass it once if the player selects the first option. We don't want them to go here. So we have these blue and green arrows. So if we trace this back, and sometimes it can be difficult to just look at it visually. So if you click on this, it'll highlight all the different points where it turns and gets you directly to the one you need. So this guy right here, we need to change this to jump to interjection. And then if we go ahead and click on this green one here, and you can see that the interjection now is pointed to, and then it's this guy right here. So we'll go ahead and change this to interjection. Okay, so now those are both pointing here. So it will now correctly, when before the two branches that would correctly lead to give quest will now instead lead to the interjection with other gath and then proceed to give quest. So now we can pop in game and check this out.
Hey, have you seen my wrench around here? No, I was about to ask you about my wrench. How is this possible? There's got to be some sort of wrench thief around here.
All right, so now it should loop in 6 seconds. And note that because we have keep target on action end checked, they continue to stare at each other.
No, I was about to ask you about my wrench. How is this possible?
Okay, so now we should be able to go over here.
Excuse me.
We can interrupt the scene, and
Wait
even
a
though
second,
if it
aren't you
did
the one who stole my wrench?
continue to play in the background, because now is scene playing would evaluate to 1, that phase would never happen and it would get skipped to loop it. So, all right, we're gonna just try and answer direct.
I'm sorry.
Well, that's all right. Can I have it back? This guy's a liar if I've ever seen one.
That interjection didn't make any sense to that line, but whatever. A lot of this dialogue is terrible. I am not the team writer for Sim 7. Okay, so we should now get our quest objective here. Let's hope that's still working. Yeah, there we go. It was delayed because of that help pop up there about charisma checks. All right, and now our quest started and we're good to go. So there you guys go. So now you can have multiple NPCs talking to each other. You can have multiple talking in a conversation with the player. It's all the same thing. It's just adding those extra tracks with additional actors, and then you do it exactly the same way you did it with the player or the NPC talking to the player. Now there's still a ton more we can do with scenes. There's a lot of cool stuff, and we'll get to those eventually. So keep an eye on the AI packages. That tutorial line is going to merge into this one as well, because it is really important to doing some of the coolest stuff you can do with scenes.